Hello and welcome everyone to RexCast number 24. Today, again, we have Mr. Gonzalo Lira here, who is going to be our eyes and ears on the ground in Ukraine. And I'd like to welcome him back very much for coming to our show several times now. If you aren't familiar with Gonzalo, I would very much suggest that you follow his work on not only YouTube, but also Telegram. Links are in the description, and you can find his material and where you can see other things that he's doing, and I guess the little bits here and there that aren't covered on these streams. Gonzalo, thanks very much for being here. It's very much appreciated. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great, and thank you so much for having me on. It's always a real pleasure. And hey, chat, I hope you all are doing good. Yeah, so all good here.
All right, so I should say that Mr. Lira is currently in Ukraine. I'm not going to say where exactly. He's in an undisclosed location.
No, I'm in Kharkov. I'm in
yes,
Kharkov,
but an undisclosed
Oh yeah, I'm not going to tell you the address. I actually can't pronounce it. So even if I wanted to, I can't tell you. But yeah, I'm in Kharkov, Ukraine, which it's a city of 1.6 million, I think. Well, not anymore. Right now, I would guess that maybe 80% of the population has left. You know, it really is a ghost town at this point.
Right.
And yeah, and right now we're in the siege of Kharkov. The Russian army is slowly but surely closing in. You can, you know, if you're lucky, you might hear some sounds of some of the shelling. Which sounds closer than it actually is. It's maybe, you know, 7 kilometers away. But you know, it's a loud bang whenever it happens, so you hear it. And yeah, the fighting is getting closer to the city center. That's where I'm located. And you know, it's been a trying experience and a little bit overwhelming. And yeah, but all in all, you know, good. You know, not dead yet. Hashtag not dead yet. And
not Coach Pinebox yet.
Not Coach Five. I really like that meme. I thought it was funny.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty good
And
too.
yeah, you know, everything is pretty good. And the reason I decided to say my family is long gone. They're out of the city, hundreds of kilometers away. But I want to see how this ends. I want to see it to the end. And perhaps it's a foolish decision on my part, and perhaps it's you know, I just want to. I can't help myself. There's something about it that I have to see how it ends. You know, I'm not participating in any fighting or anything like that, and in fact, I have not been up close and personal with any of the fighting, but I can hear it getting closer, and I just want to see it through. You know, what can I say?
Can I ask you a few questions? And obviously, you don't have to answer some of them if they are too close to, you know, home. But I'm wondering, how is the situation vis-a-vis? I mean, obviously, you have electricity, and obviously, the internet is still up and running. So communication to the outside world is very much. But my question would be, what about things like food supply and other things like that? Like, for example, is the food supply, how are you getting food would be the best question then, or to stock up early on?
No, I did stock up, but that's all gone now. And because it's never enough. You think it's going to be enough, and you calculate it and whatnot, but you wind up eating it fairly quickly. No, what happens is that the supermarkets are open. They rotate. You have a Google map that tells you which supermarkets are open on any given day. And there are also Telegram channels that tell you which supermarkets are open. They're updated every morning. And they tell you the gas stations that are open and the pharmacies that are open. Those are three things: gas stations, pharmacies, and supermarkets. And these supermarkets, I frankly don't know how they stock up. But like, for instance, today I bought some potato chips. And I noticed the date, and it was really interesting. The potato chips I bought had actually expired like 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
And so I guess what they're doing is just cleaning out all of their warehouses. And you have to keep in mind, so many people have fled the city that the food that remains in the city is more than enough for the people who have remained. And the people who have remained are, for the most part, elderly people whose families are far away. and frankly, whose trip would be more dangerous for them than to just stay put. And also, just the adventurous type. They've stayed. Now you go to a supermarket, and I went to a supermarket today, and a fairly large one. I'm not going to mention the name of it, but what was interesting was that there was a lot of people. I went there around like noonish. There were a lot of people, and the liquor section is open, but it's not cleaned out. There's still plenty of
Mm.
booze, but people aren't going hysterical, because once you're
Mm.
in the war, you realize, okay, this is scary, but it's not the end of the world. The one thing I have noticed is that there are lots of sections that are empty, and they're not going to get replenished. Okay, but there are other sections that are getting filled up every time that you go. What you do notice is that there is bread. They make a lot of bread, and it's really, really cheap and really good. I mean, it's not only freshly baked, but it doesn't have any kind of chemical or anything of the sort. It's as good as any Parisian bread. Quite frankly, I've lived in Paris,
Mhm.
so I know what I'm talking about.
Right.
And it's
I'll have to interject though. I think the best bread I've ever had is in Istanbul. But sorry, I just wanted to throw that out there.
okay, okay, but you call it no. You're not all of the supermarkets are open. They rotate. Okay, and it's a challenging experience in that regard. It's of course it's incredibly. I've said this many times. It's incredibly boring and terrifying at the same time,
Hmm.
because there isn't anything for you to do. Your stress level, because you hear air raid sirens, you hear bombing, shelling from the Russians or from the Ukrainians, because you can't tell who's firing, right? And so it's constant stress and tension, which doesn't really allow you to concentrate very well. I have
Right.
a couple of books here that I've been meaning to crack open. One of them is a big, thick, doorstopper, Dostoevsky's The Demons, and
Hmm.
I have yet to be able to crack it open. I can't focus long enough to read Dostoevsky.
It's kind of
Um,
interesting that you're talking
mhm.
about him. I can never pronounce his
Oh,
name
wait, no,
properly.
sorry, Felix. Felix, sorry for interrupting. I want to
Yeah,
get
yeah,
to a
yeah. No
point that's
worries.
actually important. The thing that I want to emphasize, that being in this war here, where I am in a city under siege by the Russians, and the Russians are advancing, and the suburb, the area of Saltivska,
Hmm.
Saltivka, okay,
Hmm.
Saltivka. It is a suburb, an area of the city in the northeast, and it is 500 meters beyond the last metro station. So you see how close it is to the city. Now that whole section was leveled. That was a horrible, horrible battle between sides there in that suburb, and it's just been destroyed. I mean, it's like a ghost town, like Lebanon or Libya or wherever else there's been some
Or
horrible fighting.
maybe
Right?
like one of the cities in Iraq or wherever where
Yeah,
the
exactly.
United States brings
But what's
freedom. Yeah.
interesting, yeah, but what's interesting is that, see, the Russians, it is completely clear that the Russians don't want to hurt the civilians. They don't want to destroy civilian infrastructure. You and I are talking right now. There is cellular telephony, there is electricity, there's running water, running sewage, there's heat, which is crucial, although the last few days have been very, very nice, actually. It's getting warmer, it's getting springtime. But in the start of it, we had heat, which there were a few days in late February, early March that were really cold, and nobody was worried about that. You see, the Russians have not destroyed that infrastructure. And what's been really eye-opening for me of this whole situation, and I've said this several times, and I'll say it again, you realize that the American mode of war is truly immoral, and you realize too, it's a lazy way to do war, because what they do is they just, with air power, they just level everything. They destroy an entire city. They destroy its infrastructure, everything, heat, electricity. They hit the power grid. They hit the water mains. They hit cell phones. They hit everything to absolutely crush the civilian infrastructure. and they
I
just
just like
leveled the
to,
damn city.
just like to point
Mhm.
out on the screen for people who are watching. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but this is a
Sure.
picture of after the air campaign in Mosul, and this is
Hmm.
what the United States did to the city in Iraq. Basically, flattened it. They did the same thing to Fallujah as well. Sorry, I just wanted to
Yeah, they
dovetail into that.
yeah
Sorry,
they
go
do
ahead.
it to all the cities, and what happens is that the Russians aren't fighting this war the way the Americans would. The Russians are clearly concerned with minimizing civilian casualties and not destroying the country. And so the Americans look at how the Russians have fought this war and they're like, oh, the Russians are losing. And why? Well, because they haven't hit the infrastructure. And the Americans automatically think that a way to win a war is to destroy the cities.
Mhm,
They don't understand that the Russians' goal is not to destroy the cities, it's to capture the country. And that's very,
mhm,
very different. When you want to capture something, you don't try to destroy it, but
mhm,
the Americans do. They destroy a land, and then they said, "Well, we're bringing democracy," which is just idiotic. I mean, I
mhm,
have to say that I've had a radical change of heart during this conflict, because
mhm,
I grew up. The first war that I remember, was the Gulf War. I mean, I was a boy during Vietnam. I didn't know what was going on when it ended in '75. I was 7 years old, so I had no conception about it. I knew Vietnam, the word, and people kept talking about it. I had no idea what it was. The first war that, as an adult, I could understand was the Gulf War, and all the
mhm.
subsequent wars. It was always the same: fly in, bomb it to
You're talking about the
smithereens,
first
and
Gulf
then
War, correct? The first
yeah,
Gulf
yeah,
War.
the
Okay, yeah.
91, the
Okay,
desert
yeah.
desert storm,
Desert Storm,
and
yeah.
blow everything away and roll in with the tanks after. But the
Mhm,
Russians, they're carrying out a completely different mode of war, a kind of war that, frankly, I would say is far more humane. I mean, war is barbaric, no matter how you look at it. But the way the Russians are doing it is far more humane towards the Ukrainian people, uh, and and uh, and to everybody involved, because they are fighting the soldiers. They're not fighting the cities, and so it's a completely different approach to war, and it makes you reevaluate the way the Americans fight wars. And the more time passes, and I'm sorry for my American listeners if they're going to be offended by this, but the more I despise the American military, the more I
mhm,
realize that um, they're evil. The way they conduct a war, because what it is you understand what it is. It's laziness, and also it's a desire to minimize American losses at all costs, which you would think, yeah, that's fine. But see, their desire to minimize to the point of having zero American casualties means that they have to maximize the casualties and suffering of the people they are invading. And I think
mhm,
that's the thing that I can't wrap my head around, because I just think it's evil. And
mhm.
also, let's face facts. The way the so-called professional soldiers who have come to Ukraine, and they've all wound up either dead or running back home with their tail between their legs, like, frankly, like pussies. I mean, really, there's this guy, Ken Ree. I'd never heard of him,
Mhm.
but apparently he's some YouTuber, soldier, special forces, all kinds, tactical kind of thing, with all of the gear, and he's a handsome guy, but strutting around like a peacock, right? And
Mhm.
it turned out that he came to Ukraine. He was here 5 minutes, and then he like ran away and tried to get the hell out of Ukraine. And the irony was that he wasn't allowed to cross the border in Poland and exit. And so he's like freaking out
I
and
think I've
calling
seen. I
the
think I've seen
Korean
this guy.
embassy.
Yeah, I think he's like
Yeah,
stuck on the border of Poland. Yeah, no, I think I've seen this guy. I've
yeah.
also
He's
heard
a
all
pussy.
kinds of things.
He's a
I've heard
pussy.
all sorts of things of like people joining the Ukraine Foreign Legion, going into battle, and then saying, "Oh, no, no, this is not. We can't." Because one of the things they did is, I believe it was after the fact that there was a TikToker who was showing something going on in their military base, and the Russians were able to zero in on it because it was geo
Oh,
linked
no, no,
to
no, no.
their
That
position.
was yesterday. No, you're confusing stories, because that was yesterday. That was the shopping
Okay.
mall. The
Okay. Shopping.
TikToker was
Yeah.
was was showing some shit of some tanks or some. I don't think there were tanks. There was some sort of weaponry, but
Hmm.
self-propelled weaponry in a shopping
Hmm.
mall. And
Hmm.
the Russians figured it out, and they nuked, or not nuked. I should be careful with my wording. They annihilated the shopping center, just razed it to the ground. And
Hmm.
the Ukrainians are saying, "Oh, look what an evil thing the Russians did!" And then it came out that the Russians had hit the military equipment, and well, the
Hmm.
mall was in
Hmm.
the way, as it were.
Absolutely.
But no, this guy
Yeah, so
Reed,
they
Ken Reed.
can't get their they can't get their likes and their upvote. So I guess it's just not a war worth fighting
Well, no, what
for
was
some of
going on
these
was that
guys.
apparently these losers, man, because apparently these guys were like, "Where's the air cover?" And you realize that they're soldiers who depend on air cover.
Yeah,
So it's basically an air cover is for them like this big bodyguard that they have that beats up everybody, and then they stroll in and act tough like they're fighting.
and
And you
yeah,
realize they're
and do
pussies.
mop up. Well, I mean, well, this is generally the way Americans fight. I have a couple of questions for you from the New
Sure.
Guardian, and he asked, "Did Coach love the Zelensky puppet show as much as the Western politicians did? He acts just like a real boy." Any comments?
Uh, that's funny. That's a good crack. Yeah, he wants to be a real live boy, like a
Yep.
little Pinocchio
Okay.
figure. Nice,
We have another
pathetic.
one.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, I don't want to literally. I know everyone has this. There have been massive hit pieces against you, and I'm not going to give them
Oh yeah,
any kind of air. So I would just say,
sure.
whatever. There's another one from Icy
No,
Saracen.
I do have
Sorry,
to
go ahead.
point something out. See, the Daily Beast. For those of you who don't know, yesterday the Daily Beast released a huge hit piece on me. It was really
Massive hit
fucking
piece.
long,
No, they were using words
long.
like ilk, his ilk,
Yeah,
sleazy. Just all of the adjectives were just horrific. I mean, it was just awful. I
yeah,
sent it
but it
to you,
was
but I
so
guess
long. Yeah,
you already. Yeah, I know. It's like 10,000 words. It took me 30 minutes to
yeah.
read.
Yeah, and the funny thing was that there was nothing in it that you'd be like, "Oh, this is really awful," and there was nothing. And like they even went for old business partners that I haven't heard from in decades, literally.
Yeah.
Um, and the business partner, well, if I'd been such a bad guy, why did he sue me? I mean,
Hmm.
obviously, so it's just bullshit. I mean, everything, just trying to throw everything but the kitchen sink at the wall to see what would stick.
Well, when
And
you start getting flack like that, you're well over the target, my friend. I
oh
mean,
yeah, I know. And
oh,
and the thing is,
absolutely.
see, nobody devotes that much time and attention unless they
Yep.
really hate somebody and really, I mean, they have a hate boner and they're looking for anything to really explain. What could he exploit? Nothing. It's really funny.
Now,
And well, here's
I
the
would
thing though.
suggest people don't if
Don't
I don't
go
would
to
you
it.
prefer
It, it
if I put a if people I don't want people to go
the
there and give
archive link.
an
Yeah,
archive link. I will put an
yeah.
archive link or you can
It's
send me one.
actually on my Twitter. It's on my Twitter on Telegram. My oh no,
Okay,
on my YouTube on my
yeah.
YouTube, my Gonzalo Lira YouTube, the
Yeah.
latest one in the description. There's the archive link. Now the reason
Okay.
I'm bringing this up, if it had been just that and they said shit about me, I wouldn't even talk about it. But I'll tell you why I'm
Mm.
talking about it. See, these guys, these individuals. See, they and this is for the audience so that and I posted a live stream on my Gonzalo Lira channel. It's the latest one. Let me just go
And I should say, everyone, while you're looking for it,
check on
while
it
you're
real
looking for
quick.
that,
And
I should tell everybody that you can find his channel's link in the description on whatever platform you're watching, whether you're watching on D Live, Twitch, what else? Twitter, both of the YouTube channels. I think we're on about nine different
I'll see
platforms.
it's called Oops.
It's in the description.
Do you hear me properly?
I could hear you. Yeah, you went a bit
Hello?
robot for a second.
Hello?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Okay, am I back? Yeah, okay. Okay, so anyway,
Yeah, you're back.
yeah, go to my latest live stream on my Gonzalo Lira channel. Yeah. And see,
Okay,
there's a link
perfect.
to it. And now in these bastards, what they said was, you know what they did? What drives me up the wall that I can't believe these fuckers did. They know that I'm in Ukraine. And in their own article, they confirm that people are looking for me and have threatened to kill me and are looking for me, actively looking for me, right?
Yeah,
And so, you
yeah.
know what these guys did? They called up the Ukrainian government to seek comment. I mean,
mm.
basically, they're like trying to wave a red flag in front of the Ukrainians and say, "Look at this guy! Look at this guy! He doesn't like you, so you should go and talk to him." And what the hell do you think
Yeah,
is going to happen? This
yeah,
TikToker that
absolutely.
happened yesterday, this morning, they picked him up and they beat the shit out of him and had him do some stupid confession. There are members of the media, journalists, that have been abused. I have it on my phone. Unfortunately, I can't go there, but on my Twitter feed, it's at real Gonzalo Lira. I posted one of my recent tweets listing the names of the journalists who have been disappeared by the Zelensky regime.
Hmm.
The Daily Beast, this author, this writer, they know this. They know that this is serious shit that's going on. And yet they basically wave a red flag in front of the Ukrainians to get them to do God knows what to me. And so I
No,
just have to say that
absolutely.
if anything happens to me, it's the responsibility of the Daily Beast. The
Yeah, yeah.
Daily
No,
Beast is responsible.
it is, and the Daily Beast. I don't want to give it any air. I just say if anybody
Yeah,
wants to read
yeah.
it, you can go to his Telegram channel, but don't give them a real click. Go to the archive.
Yeah,
A couple of
go to the archive. Don't give them a
go to
real
the
click.
archive. Do
Don't
not
improve
give
their
these guys
metrics.
any kind
Yeah.
of questions. I got a couple of questions here for you from
Hmm.
Icy Saracen, and he says, Coach, if by chance Ukraine wins and push the Russians out, do you predict Ukraine will fall into anarchy and or civil war due to all of the insurgents and US weaponry? And that would be, I would also say, German weaponry, all sorts of weaponry. And will it become a
Yeah.
breeding ground for terrorism like the Middle East or cartels like Latin America? That's from
No.
Icy
First
Saracen.
of all, the idea. No, a good question, and it's worth thinking about. Okay, there are two parts. You're basically saying, will the Ukrainians win, and will there be some insurgency that will create anarchy and chaos in Ukraine? Because
Yeah.
it could be the anarchy and chaos occurs whether Ukraine wins or loses, right? I mean, if they
Mhm.
lose, you'd think that there might be a resistance. If they win, it could become anarchic, civil warish, because that's the bottom line problem of Ukraine. You have ethnic Ukrainians and ethnic Russians living in the same country, and they really shouldn't be. And that's the problem we're having. So they're very good questions, but there are two questions. Let's start with the easy one, which is if Ukraine suddenly wins, they're not going to win. It's just as simple as that. See, I'm a 54-year-old, old guy. If I step in a ring with, I don't know, Conor McGregor or Mike Tyson when he was in his prime or something, I'm going to get the ever living shit kicked out of me. That's inevitable. Okay.
I should say
Why?
Mike Tyson
Because
loves pigeons. I should say Mike Tyson loves
well,
pigeons.
yeah, yeah, he's yeah, but you see what I'm saying, and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
this is
Of
a
course.
serious issue. See,
Yeah.
and so the Russians are going to win. This was known from the very beginning. Okay, anybody who says otherwise, they're high on their own farts, or just deluding themselves, or
Mm,
they're selling propaganda to make the Ukrainians, go off and get the shit kicked out of them. But it will hurt the Russians because of just the effort to fight the Ukrainians, sure, and it will denigrate their ability to fight NATO, possibly. Will the Ukrainians beat the Russians? No, I'm sorry. This is a realistic assessment. We have to be realistic. We can't. I mean, like I said, if I step in a ring with Conor McGregor is going to kick the shit out of me in about 5 seconds. Okay, because it's
mm.
inevitable. He's a stronger guy. He knows what he's doing. He's got the combat experience. I don't. And the Russians did have combat experience in Syria. Wait, wait. Okay. So, no, it's just that's not going to happen. Now, an insurgency, that's really interesting. Well, the Russians have been hitting these centers of foreign fighters. But one of the things that people don't seem to realize is that these centers with foreign fighters, and by the way, they've killed, by my count, they've hit four different locations and over 400 soldiers, excuse me, three locations. And by my count, in those three locations, they've killed upwards of 410 soldiers, possibly a lot more, but they've killed at least 410 soldiers, foreign soldiers, and twice that number have been permanently incapacitated. I mean, out of action. Okay, so in three attacks, they've taken out 1,200 soldiers. But what's more important, or just as important, is that the Russians in these attacks that happened in Lviv, that happened in Rivne and Ivano-Frankivsk. They hit these weapons depots, a lot of weapons that have been brought up from Europe. Now, the one in Lviv, at the Yaroviv International Peacekeeping and Security Center, which is a NATO center, basically, they took out something like $400 million worth of gear and just blew it to smithereens. And in Ivano-Frankivsk, they hit the airport there, but they didn't hit the runway. They hit some munitions depot with a lot of Western gear. And same thing, nobody knows exactly how much. I mean, the Russians probably know exactly how much money it was that year that they blew up in Ivano-Frankivsk. And insofar as Rivne, they also hit a lot of gear, but again, it's not known how much. But it wouldn't have been a trivial amount. It would have been like a serious amount, like up there with 400 million. And so the Americans say that they're going to send $1 billion worth of gear to Ukraine. Well, good luck with that. I don't think it's going to make it here. And
Yeah,
if it does,
I'd
the Russians
like
are going to interdict it.
I'd like to get into that point in a second, because this is actually something that I wanted to talk about, and it's about the United States talking about wanting to build a government in exile, plus if Moscow is able to achieve its goals, create a long-standing guerrilla war. But there's a couple of questions again that I'd just like to ask. This one is also from Icy Saracen, and he says, Coach, do you think the Ukraine is going to be divided like Cyprus or British India in the near future?
I actually think that it might well be, and I actually think that though a lot of Ukrainians will be extremely upset at me saying this, I think that in the long run it might be better for both sides to have a Russian republic and a Ukrainian republic, and a majority Russian and a majority Ukrainian, and a house divided might be better in the long run for both, because my understanding of Ukraine and Russia has undergone quite the education in the last 4 weeks. Because before, I never really thought much about Ukraine, the politics of it, because I had made up my mind very early on that I wasn't going to interfere in Ukraine politics. I felt that it was not my place to interfere as a guest in Ukraine. And so I studiously avoided any political topic regarding Ukraine. But now that I've seen it carefully and I've studied the issue, and the fact that it is very clear that the ethnic Ukrainian, there's a ultra-nationalist ethnic Ukrainian component in Western Ukraine that is severely anti-Russian. And it is a large enough component that in a realistic sense, you will never be able to get rid of it. That is the component that has abused the citizens of the Donbass, of Lugansk and Donetsk. And that component is the one that it would be best if it had its own country with no Russians in it, or Russians became, ethnic Russians became a small minority within that country. The problem, of course, might be that these Ukrainian nationalists would begin to seriously abuse this Russian minority within their own borders. But that's a different problem, a later problem, right? The upfront problem is Ukraine is corrupt, it's unmanageable, it is too big of a country. And so the smart thing would be to break it up. And I think that what they're going to wind up doing, the Russians, not right away, but I think that they might be thinking along the following lines of breaking it up into between 3 and 5 pieces. One piece would be Crimea, which is going to be Russian forever. The Russians will never give it up. Crimea is always going to be Russian. Then I see your map there. Yeah, just scroll it up a little bit. Then I think the second piece is going to be an ethnic Russian area, starting with Kharkiv in the northeast, and making like a sweeping curve, like pretty much all of the lines of activity there that you're seeing, that whole curve all the way to Odessa, that would be the ethnic Russian Republic, Novorossiya, a lot of people want to call it. And
New
that
Russia.
would be a separate entity. New Russia, right? And then there would be around Kiev, and to a blob to starting in Kiev and moving on to the center and to the west. That would be Ukraine. It would be a rump state. It would be roughly a third the size it is today. And then that's the 3 component parts that I'm thinking of at this time. Now, the 4th and 5th part is they might wind up giving Lviv to Poland and chunks of Western Ukraine to Hungary, and possibly even Romania, because Hungary, Romania, and Poland especially have longstanding claims to territory that now is part of Ukraine. The city of Lviv in western Ukraine is historically Polish, and it has. Can you scroll up to show people where that city is
Yep.
so they have an idea of it?
Right here.
And yeah, and can you make the map a little smaller so people or scoot it
There we
over
go.
to the left?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's all it
Like,
goes to. It doesn't go all the way to the border, unfortunately. I can probably bring up
oh,
a
okay,
map
okay.
of let me see. Yeah, so you
That's
as you
okay.
can
I
see,
mean,
yeah.
yeah. Oh, yeah, and see that key map there? Maybe make that one bigger so that we can just point it and you can point it with your cursor. Lviv is a city that's about an hour's drive, maybe 2 hours drive away from the border with Poland. Do keep in mind, Ukraine is huge. It's the size of Texas. And so, as European countries go, it's the second biggest on the continent. And so Lviv is a historically Polish city. And the Poles might be willing to do something about it. There's a rumor going around right now that the Poles are thinking of deploying Polish troops in that area, in Lviv, Rivne, Ternopil, because these are long-standing Polish cities and regions that, because of the Second World War and the Cold War, they lost. And so it could be that they decide to try to make a grab at them. The rumor going around is that the Polish general staff wants to make a push and deploy troops at the end of April. And they're looking at it because the Russians are not deploying that many troops. They're not deploying any troops in Western Ukraine. It's all been on the east and the center and the south. And so they're saying the Poles are thinking, well, maybe the Russians are never going to go to West. And some people, some thoughtful people, are thinking, yeah, it's kind of weird. Maybe the Russians are just sitting tight, and the idea that the Russians have is that maybe the Poles will step in and take that piece of Ukraine, and Russia and Poland and perhaps Hungary will wind up gobbling up Ukraine and tearing it apart. I mean, grotesque as that may sound. But I mean, I'm not saying this in any kind of emotional way. I'm just looking at it geopolitically. It could be that something like that happens. I don't think so. I think that what's going to happen is that shortly the Russians are going to invade Western Ukraine. And because, this is an invasion. They call it a special operation. It's fine, but it's an invasion. And the goal of this invasion, the political goal of this invasion, is to capture the whole country intact, or as intact as possible, as undamaged as possible. That's been their goal from the get-go. And it's not that the Russians want to absorb Ukraine. No, they don't want that. They want Ukraine to be what it's always been, which is a buffer zone, a neutral buffer zone. Neutral or friendly to Russia, but not friendly to the fucking NATO and the Americans. I mean, come on. And I blame the political leadership in Ukraine. Well, they were puppets of the West, quite frankly. But that political leadership in Ukraine caused this conflict.
Oh, yeah, well, this is something I would get to right now. It's a Guardian article, but before we do that, there's a question I have to ask you because it has been sent over. And this is something, unfortunately, we were talking about pre-stream before we went live. And actually, the person is asking, he's saying you don't actually have to answer it, but Coach Red Pill doesn't have to answer this if he doesn't want to. But how does he feel knowing that despite being a war zone, he's living better than Ethan Ralph? And you don't have to answer that if you don't want to. So,
poor guy.
So I'll just reread that. Coach Red Pill doesn't have to answer this if he doesn't want to, and this comes from Dental Floss, and he's a big contributor on the entropy, and he says, but how does he feel knowing that despite being in a war zone, he's living a better life than Ethan Ralph? Answer if you want. You don't have to if you don't want to.
I'm not going to say anything, but man, it's a sad state of affairs. What can I say? It's just a sad state of affairs. Okay. And that's all I'm going to comment.
All right. So there's a couple of things I'd like to I guess dovetail off of what you were just saying. There's a YouTuber, and his name's Morgoth, and he talks about the different kinds of leftists and different kinds of the way media portrays international events, and he calls them hatchlings. You could even use the word, I guess, a newborn baby. But like when things like this just pretty much come out, excuse me, they act as though they've just hatched from their egg with absolutely no understanding of what's preceded any of these sorts of things. And so, for example, like there's an article here that I'm showing, and this is the Guardian.
That's a good phrase. That's a good phrase. Hatchling.
Hatchlings. Yeah, they're hatchlings, right? So
they like popped out and like, why is everything going like this? Oh,
why is this happening? We've got Putler versus
for no reason
Captain
whatsoever.
Ukraine. Yeah, for no reason whatsoever. So this is Morgoth's term that he uses, calls hatchlings, and even the Guardian, which is literally probably one of the most far left, absolutely far left newspapers. I don't even know if they actually do print newspapers anymore. But, even they're talking about many predicted NATO expansion would lead to war. Those warnings were ignored. It's long been clear that NATO expansion would lead to tragedy. Now we're paying the price for the U.S.'s arrogance. So this is, I think, something that I've been noticing, and maybe you might want to comment on it afterward. But the thing is that these things that we're witnessing right now, they didn't come out of nowhere. They didn't come out of some sort of ethereal dust. These are long-standing issues that have been going on for decades and very much heating up over the last 8 years. But one thing that I'd like to maybe ask you is, why is it that, I'm not even joking with you at this point, because I'm seeing it in terms, the propaganda at this point coming out of Western media, and I'd just like to make clear
it's hysterical
that I'm still able to get on RT because it hasn't been shut off in my country where I'm in right now. The fact that they're shutting off access to information is absolutely weird. How they've completely shut off information, and
they've lost the plot.
They've lost the plot.
Yeah.
So now getting back to these sorts of things, there are a lot of different sort of questions. There is one question that came in. Coach Red Pill, when this comes from Nonya. Coach Red Pill, when Kharkiv falls, what will you do? Also, will you interview Russian soldiers?
Well, if they speak English, sure, why not? I'll talk to anybody. Anybody that crosses my path, Ukrainian armed forces, Russian armed forces, yeah, sure, it would be interesting.
Now, how would you attribute that the hatchling idea, and this is from Morgoth, the idea of our media presenting information, and also I should say thanks very much from Nanya. Thanks very much for the support. And if anybody would like to, toward the end of this broadcast, we'll be taking questions at the end, so you can get your super chats in on either the Entropy or on the Felix Rex channel. It's the only two ways to do it, because all the other ones, or on DLive as well. But one question is why our media has been absolutely atrocious for decades. I mean, that goes without saying. But the current crisis that I believe is coming on the heels of the loss in interest that people have had with COVID is almost on a level that I can't even imagine, to be honest. I couldn't have imagined that it would be this extreme, because I do remember, like you were saying, the first war you remember was the first Gulf War. Mine was the second Gulf War. The Iraq invasion over weapons of mass destruction that never existed. Now,
right.
And I remember even understanding at that time, I mean, the absolute nature of the media completely lost the plot. And I never thought it would go back to that, because at that time, the United States was, kind of like a vicious animal that had been beaten or had been bitten. And it was looking to just, they didn't care who they were, but they had to bomb somebody. And just the level. And we've come full circle with this. Now, my question is how is it that so many people have been so duped into believing the sort of hatchling understanding of this predicament that we're in right now?
I think it's actually very easy. I've been giving it a lot of thought, to tell you the truth, and it's actually simple when you realize what's going on with the people. The people for a long time, but especially over the last couple of years, they feel extremely isolated from one another, and that kind of isolation, it's basically, solitary confinement, and that drives people nuts. And it drives them crazy, crazy. And you see all these
Mm,
incidents of some poor woman who starts frothing at the mouth because you're not wearing a mask. Now, we laugh at her, we call her a Karen and all the rest of it, but look at her as a human being, and look at the rage and fear in her eyes, the
mm,
insanity. What
mm,
has caused that? You have to look at that in a way as an open-hearted man, not, just mocking her or putting her down. You have to look at her with compassion and realize how terrified she has been made to feel. She's
yeah.
been constantly bombarded with news of how awful the world is and this virus and all the rest of it, and she's freaking out. She's terrified. And so
Mm,
she's trying to find a place where she can dump all this fear and rage, and she finds you because you're not wearing a mask, because
mm,
you and I know that masks don't do anything. It's like putting a chain link dome over your house, expecting that chain link dome over your house to stop the mosquitoes. It's not going to
mm,
work,
mm,
and we know this, okay, because we have a little bit of common sense here. But see, this poor woman, she's been driven insane with fear by the media, and the media does it because, of course, they make money off of fear. The more fear, the more they beat those drums of fear, the more money they make from the attention that they get. And so this poor woman, she has been deliberately scared out of her mind by the media, by government bureaucrats who, rather than try to calm people down, try to up the fear factor, because the politicians, it helps them to channel people's fear into voting for them. Because they position themselves as, I can relieve your fear if you just vote for me. And so all of these different players are driving people to insanity, an insanity of fear. And so when they find some cause, they let out all their rage, all of their anger, all of their fear. They
mm.
drop it on, like a bomb, on the guy who's not wearing a mask. They drop it on the Russians. I mean, come on, we're having, like, I know you have a thing that you're going to put up of Yuri Gagarin, that they want to strip him of some honor. The man is dead. Okay, number one. So
And I
stripping
should
him
say
of
he's
any
been dead
honor is
for almost
pointless.
60
Yeah,
years.
50 years. Yeah.
No, no,
I
more
mean,
than
the
50
first
years.
man
He's
in
been dead.
space. Yeah.
The first, yeah. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah. And so
Go ahead.
the point is that they're freaking out, and they're dumping this fear that is in their hearts, and the fear and the rage and anger that is in their hearts, because these last 2 years have been completely wasted for most people. And so they want to dump it somewhere. They need to purge this. And so it becomes 1984, where
Mm,
you have the 2 minutes of hate. First, it was Black Lives Matter. Then it was the anti-vaxxers. Now it's Russian shills, and Ukraine good and Russia bad. And Morgoth is very smart to come up with this term hatchling, because it's very true. Because it's not that these people are stupid. It's not even that they are ahistorical. It's that they are latching on to the first situation of moral clarity, where they're good and the other is bad, and we can dump all our hatred and fear on the bad thing. Because you have to keep in mind, when you have a more nuanced view of reality, you can't be emotional about either side. You have to take it with equanimity and look at both sides and sort of like figure out, okay, well, this guy is doing this for these good reasons that are justified, and this other guy is doing this for these good reasons that are justified. And so it's more complex and nuanced. But when you have your heart is filled with fear and rage, and you don't know where to put it out, then you want to make everything black and white, and you want to be
yeah.
on the side of the white hats, and you want to dump all that hatred and rage and anger and fear. You want to dump it, and you dump it on the target that unscrupulous politicians and unscrupulous media figures have decided is the enemy du jour.
Mm,
2 years ago, it was white privilege and white racism and BLM good. And then it became anti-vaxxers are bad and they're all conspiracy theorists, and we gotta kill them in order to save
yeah,
them, which
yeah.
didn't make any sense, right? And now it's Putin, evil, Russian, evil, Yuri Gagarin. We have to exhume his body and just crucify his dead body so that people know that we really, really, really hate the Russians. It's fucking crazy. Okay,
Mm,
and
I
that, it
agree.
seems to me, is the explanation. You tell me if you agree or not.
I totally agree with you. I think that we are in the midst of a mass psychosis, and it began,
Yeah.
at least more than a couple of years ago, but went into overdrive at the beginning of
Mm.
2020,
Yeah.
and it's just being fed more and more and more and more. And people aren't basically in control of their faculties at this point because they are
No.
stressing, fearful. I mean, I don't even imagine the number of people who've lost jobs, lost houses, lost businesses, and they need somebody to blame. Now, as I said, I think the inertia of COVID was pretty much running on fumes by the time this began. And it was just another
Yeah.
way. One thing people don't really realize is that there's been a war going on in Yemen with Saudi Arabia, our special ally in the Middle East, for
Mm.
years now. And there's been
Yeah.
somewhere in the ballpark of several 100,000 civilians that have been either killed by bombs or because of the way they fight, been killed by starvation or disease.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
nobody cares. Nobody has said anything about this for years. And then you have,
Yep.
excuse me, excuse me. And then you have, for example, the Ukraine situation. I would venture to guess, even today, less than 30% of Americans could find Ukraine on a map that wasn't labeled.
Oh no,
But
you're
like
way
but
overshooting the mark.
two months
I
ago,
think
two
maybe
months, 3 months,
20% could find it. 20%
maybe,
could find it if they're
maybe,
lucky.
maybe,
Yeah.
you know. And so I would say that hold on a sec. George is going to be joining us on. I would say that yeah, absolutely. This is something that people are feeding, and this actually brings into another question from Icy Saracen, and he
Hmm.
asks, Coach, why does the state of Israel get a pass when it bombs Palestinians in Gaza and Iranian militias neighboring Syria on the grounds of
See,
self-defense, but Russia
see,
gets
Felix,
crucified on similar grounds?
Fe, Felix, um, see, when I go in the woods and I see like a little bit of quicksand, I go around it. Okay,
Yeah, I
that's all I
gotcha.
have to say.
Yeah, it's one of those sort of topics. I think we've said this before on other
Well,
streams, and I
it's a, see,
apologize, but
bringing up certain
mm,
topics. You have to pick your battles and know when to deal with a particular topic, and realize that sometimes dealing with a particular topic will be counterproductive at the moment that you are at the moment that you are living, rather. See,
mm,
and so that particular topic, it's certainly worthy of discussion, and it's certainly worthy of really digging down on it and bringing out some hard truths about that situation. But at this time, I'm dealing with the Ukraine situation. And so I have to keep my focus on what is my priority now. Because my priority now, and I've said this multiple times and I'll say it again, because it's always good to repeat your objectives, if only to clarify it for yourself, let alone other people. My objective is for this war to be ended as quickly as possible. And my thinking is that the more propaganda and unrealism people hear, the longer it will be stretched out. Because when people realize the reality of the situation, and realize that it's not an issue of the Russians being good or the Russians being bad or the Ukrainians being good or the Ukrainians being bad. It has nothing to do with goodness and badness. It has to do with practical reality. And the practical reality is that the Russians, no matter how you cut it, they're going to win. They have the will to do it, and they have the material and the men to do it. And so it's inevitable. And
mm.
therefore, what we should be doing is being as realistic as possible, and not allowing ourselves to have these stupid daydreams of, the ghost of Kiev, and how there was some lady in some babushka in Ukraine who, with her pickles, killed
Yeah, yeah, her pickles.
500,000 Russian
Yeah, yeah,
soldiers.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, come on, right? I mean, be
They're almost
realistic
talking
here.
about it in terms of Marvel's Avengers. I thought, it was
Yeah, it's
ridiculous.
stupid.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's stupid. Yeah, and so the
Okay.
point is, you have to be realistic so as to end the war, end the needless deaths. Because see, if you are a soldier and you are convinced by this propaganda that your side is going to win, you're going to fight to the death, because you're going to think that your cause not only is just, because we all think that our cause is just, right? But you're going to think that you might win, so you will take more risks, you will fight harder, you will possibly die
Mm,
needlessly. because you believe in false propaganda. But if you understand the reality of the situation, you'll realize, it's not worth it. It's not worth throwing away my life. And it's not just one soldier, it's thousands of young men, the flower of Ukraine, the young men, the boys of today who will build a better Ukraine tomorrow. Their lives thrown away for nothing except the ego of the cokehead of Kiev, quite frankly. Because that guy is fucking evil. That cokehead of Kiev, that puppet in well, a lot of people say that he's in Poland right now, but that's another story. Sorry for going a rant, but I just want to make it clear to people that the whole point is to minimize loss of life by being realistic and understanding the limits of what's going on and what can be done. Okay, that's my purpose.
Okay, no, it's good. I should say George has just arrived, and I'd like to say hi to George. Before I do that, I have to get to a couple of questions that have been asked. One of them is talk about the West using Biden as a scapegoat to back out of this situation. Now, it's kind of an interesting question.
Oh yeah,
because
that came up. Alex Christoforou, who does the show with the Duran. I hope you guys are going to hook up and do a show together, because you're great.
Oh yeah, I emailed them. Yeah,
they're both great. So but my point is, Alex Christoforou was the guy who came up with this idea, and god damn, that's a smart idea. He was of the opinion that the Hunter Biden laptop that's coming out that has all kinds of connections to Burisma and Ukrainian corruption, that they could all pin the tail on the donkey being, in this case, Joe Biden, and potentially impeach him and have the whole Ukrainian thing go away with him and let the Russians have their way with Ukraine. And it's a very provocative thesis, and I think it might turn true. Because, see, the American military is realizing they can't handle the Russians. The Russians can hurt the American military really badly, and they have the will to do it. And so I think that the American military is the one putting the brakes on this whole thing. I'm hoping to talk to some military analysts to get a sense, because it seems that the American military is the one that's consistently kind of like holding up the possibility of going to war. But George here would know better. How's it going, George?
It's going great. I just got here, but yeah, I was listening to the Duran and you yesterday. There's a lot of stuff going on in Ukraine. I've been posting lots of maps on the different oil and natural gas pipelines. Because I mean the sticking point, the sticking point to Ukraine that nobody talks about is, in the previous shows we've been talking about, Russia only has 3 ports in the whole country: St. Petersburg, Sevastopol, and Vladivostok area, and all 3 of them are naturally blocked in by, Vladivostok has the Japanese island chain around it. The Baltic is, the St. Petersburg is obviously in the Baltic, and Crimea and Sochi and Novorossiysk is blocked in the Black Sea. So they only have 3 ports. In history, the British have always tried to block them in for the past 300 years. Well, now they have oil that comes out. Their oil and natural gas pipelines come out through the same areas. So by moving into Georgia and Ukraine, the whole idea is to actually reroute the oil and natural gas away from Turkey and away from Russia. So the ability to block in Russia's economy is what has them perturbed. And no one's talking about this outside of this show. I've been following this for a very long time. With Mearsheimer, Professor Peter Cohen, Professor Ray McGovern, Bradley of the Senator Bradley from New Jersey was talking about this, how Clinton and Bush 43 were not supposed to move NATO 1 inch further past Germany, yet Clinton, triumphantly moved NATO to Czechoslovakia Poland and Hungary. But why the sticking point is Ukraine is that's where the Americans moved in big tech, big finance, military industrial complex into Ukraine by flipping the elections in the Maidan Revolution, where I mean our
color revolutions as well.
Yeah, all the history of the color revolutions, for the past 14 years at that point, we had our ambassador out, Jeffrey Pyatt, out in Maidan Square leading the revolution. That's against all ambassadorial, all diplomatic protocols. I mean, and any regular worker would get fired and have their security clearance revoked for doing that.
Something happened here. Sorry, guys. Something happened here. I'm going to have to go. Sorry.
Okay. Is everything okay? All right. Well, he's just dropped out. I guess it's me and you, George.
Okay.
All right.
I made it.
Okay. Yeah. No worries. Yeah. Yeah. I guess so. I'm sure that he has things that he needs to do, and that's completely understandable, given the fact of where he is. I did want to just a comment, but unfortunately, it's from Oh My God Puppies. He says, "I've had boomer friends who have become totally unhinged. Coach Red Pill is right. It's all caused by TV news. They don't see how NBC and the New York Times have changed. They need to believe they can be objective truth by watching it." So I completely agree. Thanks for that. Oh My God Puppies. But yeah, 100%.
Well, just continuing what I'm saying and answer that. I come back. I've been out of the country. I've been living abroad for 12 years now. I mean, I'm back in the U.S. at this moment. Right within a few blocks of.
That's me. That coach. That's just emergency vehicles going by my place.
Yeah, I'm living within a few blocks of George Herbert Walker Bush's and George W. Bush's house, deep in oil country here in Texas.
Right.
So and Halliburton has just tremendous amount of operations in the Middle East and the Caspian Sea area. So they know exactly where those pipelines are. I mean, I just started posting all the maps. It hasn't been since around 2014, after the Maidan Revolution, and it's no coincidence that Russia and China started building and rerouting all their pipelines and spending trillions of dollars in doing so. And it's not just Russia and China. India built that big port in Chabahar in southern Iran on the south side of the Hormuz Strait. And they started building, I think it's already built now, the railroad that they've extended the railroad system down to the port. And that is obviously for the purpose of not having to go through, well, for India, it's to get around Pakistan and then not go through the Strait of Hormuz. And of course, that port became big this week because the U.S. wanted India to denounce Putin or they'll get sanctions and not buy Russian weapons anymore. Otherwise, they'll get sanctions. And Modi flew to Moscow and made a deal to trade Russian oil for Indian rupees. Well, they had that port built years ago, and they spent $1 billion in doing so, and another $1 billion to build a railroad down there to give them the option of not having the United States wave their finger at them.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when you get back to Ukraine, Ukraine is a super corrupt country. All the North African countries where there was the color revolutions are all super corrupt. We're not arguing that they're not. And some of the most corrupt countries are, Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, all the stands. But the United States has a tendency to move into extremely corrupt countries and increase their corruption. So it's in Ukraine, it seems like the same thing happened, because when you start talking about, well, Devin Archer, he's the son of, no, not John Kerry. He's the son of, I can't remember off the top of my head, but he was convicted a few years ago, and he was one of Hunter Biden's partners. So there's a whole bunch of sons of politicians that are gone over there and gotten no-show jobs.
Right.
I mean, the deal with Hunter Biden on the board of Burisma is oil and gas. Once the pipelines are built, oil and natural gas flow through the pipelines, and you don't really need anybody other than the maintenance workers. You don't need a board of people, to make decisions about natural gas, because it just flows through the pipelines anyway.
Mm.
So you get these no-show jobs that aren't just no-show jobs, they're ridiculous no-show jobs.
Mm.
Let me hand it back over to you.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you on that. And just bringing it back to the topic about the mainstream media, Sparky says boomers and the poor often fall victim of the mainstream media. And I completely agree with you on that, Sparky. I would also say, with regards to India, they are already telling Russia that they'll buy their oil at discount, the fertilizers that they need. Now, it should be said that India relies upon Russian fertilizer to grow their food. And while the United States has been trying to force India to denounce Russia, they basically have to look out for their own self-interest, because if they aren't able to secure these supplies, that they would basically not be able to function in their current capacity and would see starvation in their country. And they're also now taking advantage of all kinds of things of Western companies. And this goes to a larger point. We also have now, I have it here somewhere. So Saudi Arabia now this is a very, very important topic, that Saudi Arabia is considering accepting the Chinese currency for oil sales. Now, this is probably the biggest story of this current conflict, because these are the cracks in the U.S. petrodollar. Now, I do believe that the petrodollar is understood by most people on this stream, but maybe, George, do you want to explain it, or should I explain it myself?
I can explain it.
All right, go ahead. Yeah.
After World War II, the United States had Bretton Woods in 1944. They made they correlated the British pound and the US dollar to a gold-backed system.
Exactly.
And then that lasted as a gold-backed currency till the Vietnam War. We had inflation. When the Yom Kippur War in 1973, the Israelis won it. The U.S. had backed Israel in the Yom Kippur War with resupply of ammo. OPEC countries got angry. We had the oil embargo and the big lines of, in 1973. I was a little kid back then. And then because of that caused so much inflation right at the end of Vietnam. Nixon changed from the Bretton Woods system to a petrodollar system, so the whole world would trade their energy in U.S. dollars. So no matter where the oil and natural gas is going, all the money flows through Wall Street. Since then, it stopped inflation. Then it was a brilliant move in some ways, because it's backed the United States debt since 1974. So now that our debt is so high, and we're so dependent upon this petrodollar trading system and having the money go through Wall Street, even if it's just going from one side of the Mediterranean to the other, like in Libya, the U.S. Treasury Department is now solely dependent upon kicking the can down the road. So since Saudi Arabia is the big player, having them start to seek an alternative means the end of the petrodollar. So Wall Street has got to be freaking out about this and getting back to the importance of all those pipelines that I've been looking at for years and years, but started looking at them again yesterday or the last couple of days, is, China within the past 6 years has built a huge pipeline system through Myanmar. So they only have to go from Saudi Arabia to Myanmar to offload their ships, which speeds up the transition. I mean, that way the ships don't have to go through. They still have to go through. Well, they don't even have to go through the Strait of Hormuz anymore.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, this whole thing. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, a lot of people don't understand that the Chinese and the Russians have absolutely been looking at this for a long time and how to de-dollarize their economies, because they understood that the United States was not using its position as the guarantor of the global reserve currency in any way, shape, or form that resembled anything of having goodwill. I think that they have been working on this Belt Road Initiative they've been talking about for a long time, about de-dollarizing their economies. And what you have right now is, if you take basically Iran from the east and you go around to the stands and you include Russia, and then you go down through China, and like, as you said, Myanmar now, as they've gone back to being a military-run country, which was inevitable. That country is just too diverse, and a lot of it is actually the legacy of the British Empire. But it was a country that not all countries are capable of having democracy. And this is something that I think Western people are quite ignorant of. I mean, there are just too long-standing ethnic, religious, or political differences. The best example of this was Iraq. I mean, it was run by a minority Sunni-led government under Saddam Hussein. The minute that was toppled, it broke into a civil war because the majority Shia population, they wanted their cut of it wasn't going to be any kind of. You see this in Western countries as well, is that particular minority groups, they vote based on their particular. They don't vote based on the issues. They vote based on their group. I mean, in the United States, you can see that with African Americans. I think they vote at something like 90% Democrats. You'll see that in Europe, where in Germany, for example, they all vote. The Turkish people, for example, they all vote for the very, very far left in Germany, but then they'll vote for Erdogan, the far right Islamist president in Turkey. So yeah, it's a sense that a lot of these issues aren't so easily cut from a Western first world mold, is what and I think that this is absolutely somebody's saying this is changing with Latinos. Yeah, I would agree with that with Latinos. And one of the reasons that is because Latinos are starting to succeed and starting to assimilate. And once they do, then it becomes a much more along the lines of issues rather than just group dynamics. But I really do think that the one thing to take away from what's happening right now is the petrodollar. If the United States loses control of the petrodollar and its position of being the world reserve currency, I don't think many Americans, and this will obviously have repercussions across the entire developed world, I don't think people really understand how absolutely transformative this is. And we are literally in, I would say, probably the greatest geopolitical shift since the end of the Soviet Union. And I would venture even more so, because this is going to have worldwide implications, not just on the Soviets and their breakup of their stands. It's quite interesting. President Putin today, I'm just going to go through this article very quickly. He basically went on Russian television and said that the New World Order are deliberately crashing the economy as part of the Great Reset. Now, I'll just go through very quickly. It's quite kind of interesting because Biden, the same day, says that the U.S. must lead this new world order that is emerging right now, a bipolar world. And I'll just go through a couple of the things that Putin said. He said, Russian President Vladimir Putin has warned that the New World Order are deliberately creating economic hardships around the globe in order to push the Great Reset on humanity. During a speech that was broadcast live on Russian television, Putin also slammed Russian oligarchs fleeing to Israel as a fifth column of national traitors who view themselves as a superior race and cannot make do without foie gras, oysters, or gender freedom, as they call it, closed quote. Any nation, and even more so the Russian people, will always be able to distinguish true patriots from scum and traitors and will simply spit them out like an insect in their mouth, spit them out onto the pavement. And basically, he goes on about this, but what he believes, and this is something I would say about the sanctioning and the breakup of the petrodollar, is we are literally seeing a complete realignment of the global world order. And I think that for example, the countries that have been pretty much in lockstep with the United States diktats on, and I call this group of countries the American-led imperial cartel. That would include the UK, that would include Japan, that would include a lot of different countries. But I mean, we pretty much understand what they are. Is that what we're witnessing right now is an understanding that the current model and the current global order cannot stand this stress test. And they are literally now provoking these countries. So, for example, okay, we have to completely ban and sanction Russia into the dust. But what does that do? Massive problems with food. Supply chains are already creaky because of COVID. What you're going to have is the least prosperous people in Western countries bear the brunt of this in things like higher fuel costs, higher food costs, and inflation. And so what you're having is these countries in the West are demanding that the poor in their countries basically subsidize the eradication of the poor in Russia. And there's a very good documentary called All Wars Are Banker Wars, and I would suggest everyone watch that. And this kind of goes to a chat from Forrest Gump. Thanks very much. He says, thanks for the info. Pray for the Ukrainian people and the Russian people, helplessly caught in the machinations of the globalists. And this is actually, thank you very much for that, Forrest. Appreciate it. And this is what I would get back to, is that, yes, we are witnessing basically a chessboard, if you will, of shifting global geopolitical stratagems. And again, it all comes back to following the money, if that makes sense. So, excuse me.
Well, not just following.
Can you take the floor for a minute on that? Because I actually have to go to the washroom. I'll be back in a sec. So thanks.
Felix raised a whole bunch of issues because one thing I like about the follow the money, and one thing I don't like about it is you follow the money. It shows you kind of who's prepared to handle the situation or who caused it. But if people stop there, they're only stopping halfway through the equation. A lot of people are like, follow the money, but then they stop. In methodology and rational actor belief preference constraint models, it's one's beliefs that dictate their preferences, and the constraints is the money. So it's what they're going to do with the money. So in this case, at the end of the Cold War, a lot of U.S. companies moved into Central Eastern Europe and Russia, and they created the oligarchs. So that's what created the tremendous imbalance and wealth disparity in Central and Eastern Europe and Russia. So instead of having a diverse economy that spreads the wealth, the United States actually created that Russian oligarch system and actually made it worse. The United States has had a history of doing that. There was a book by a guy named Robert Audi called the resource curse phenomenon, and that was where oil and natural gas and mineral rich countries tend to work with American multinational corporations to extract the the petroleum or minerals, but then that locks a very corrupt regime into power that you can't change. He wrote that book in 1994. And, the liberals were going to come in with the NGOs and Peace Corps and these kind of groups, and they were going to fix it. So in the 2000s, when we had the regime change strategies and the United States having, Iraq and Afghanistan, and then the color revolutions, the Arab Spring, the United States came in. Oh, yeah, you see it big time in Afghanistan. Well, they come in and they back their puppet. I don't want to say puppet, their preferred candidate. But the preferred candidates become super corrupt, and the United States doesn't do anything about it. You look at Karzai and Ghani in Afghanistan, or if anybody remembers Chalabi in Iraq.
Yeah, I do. I remember him. Yep.
Okay, so we just have this. We just have it doesn't matter whether it's the multinational corporations or our government. They come in and they entrench someone that's just as corrupt. So it doesn't matter whether it's the old school 1950s, 1960s, where we went to Vietnam and Cambodia and made a corrupt system more corrupt, or Latin America, we move into those corrupt countries and make them more corrupt. We've still, and Mearsheimer talks about this, we still have that reverse Midas touch of moving into countries and having the reverse Midas touch of making them more corrupt. And this is there's all these different strategies that you could have used in Ukraine, but it's come to a head in Ukraine because now it hems in Russians' ports and it hems in their oil and natural gas pipelines. People were arguing with me on some other forums the other days that for some reason they didn't think that there was any oil and natural gas pipelines going through Ukraine. Okay, I wasn't. They thought that this whole calamity in Ukraine just started a month ago. They don't realize that in 2014 was the last straw. When our ambassador was leading that revolution, that was the last straw. But they couldn't do anything about it then until they rerouted those pipelines. And once they rerouted those pipelines, now they're all starting to move. It's not just Russia. It's not just China. I mentioned the Myanmar pipeline and the Chabahar part built by the Chabahar part built by India, because even India by 2014, that was a big, huge red flag.
I should just interject for 1 second. Sorry about that, George. I just got a DM from Coach Red Pill, and he said, sorry about that. Something's happened here that forced me to hang out for reasons I'm not able to talk about for now. I'll tell you later on. Not to worry. Nothing serious. Everything's fine. Hashtag not dead yet. He's not Coach Pinebox. So he's okay. I guess something might have happened that forced him to as he ran out pretty quickly. I guess there was something important that happened around. So it's understandable. It's completely. So sorry to sidetrack on that. There's a couple of people in. Yeah. Exactly.
If he needs to leave, he just needs to hang up and leave.
Yeah, exactly. So that's exactly. I mean, he's inside of a war zone, so I'm not going to get upset about that in any way or form. So, yeah, absolutely. I should say we're going to go for probably another 10 minutes or so. We've been going almost an hour and a half. I'm going to keep the show to about an hour and a half. There's another comment here from Sparky. It says, accepting false premises set by the mainstream media is often the first step in falling into intellectual traps, leading to many useful idiots among the educated. And I would agree with that, especially when. Sorry, I'm on
my LinkedIn page. I'm looking at a whole bunch of well-educated government employees that are just fall for this false narratives, hook, line, and sinker. I got out of the DC bubble. I've been living in the Middle East, Southeast Asia, and East Asia for the past 12 years. So I'm getting a whole bunch of other news sources because I have a whole bunch of interpreters that watch a whole bunch of regional news 24/7. And so I got out of the bubble, and that's why I can look back, like getting out of Plato's cave. I can look back and be like, well, mainstream media leaves out 3/4 of it and just focuses on 1/4 and never explains the other, the other angles to the story. I was watching mainstream media, the TV generals, except for Colonel McDonald or McGregor rather, are all talking about how Russia has this fail, stall, shock and awe blitzkrieg strategy. Well, they're not doing a shock and awe strategy. They're doing a cauldron strategy. The United States used that in Fallujah. That's where that started. The Russians picked it up and did it in replicated it.
I'm sorry. Could you explain what the cauldron strategy is for those of our viewers that might not know?
Oh yeah, it's in the Second Battle of Fallujah, the U.S. Marines, well, they already had the cities cordoned off, so they told the citizens to evacuate because that's a Sunni area. So Al Qaeda, well, back then it was Al Qaeda in Iraq. They wanted the citizens, to leave Fallujah. That's called a NEO. It's a non-combatant evacuation order, is what that stands for. So they orchestrated a NEO of the citizens, and any fighting age males could also leave. You just can't bring your weapons. So the purpose of the NEO is to get the citizens out of the way, and even to drive up the desertion rate of the enemy, because the military age men can leave. They just can't leave with any weapons. So the Russians had set up around all the major cities. People see the battlefield map that you and Mike post, and they've always left out. They've always left a big opening out of the encirclement for people to leave on the highways and the railroads. They've never shut any of that down. So different. It's not just one TV general. It's like all of them. They keep on saying, well, we would have had the electricity and everything and the water and everything shut down right away. How come all that, the infrastructure and the communications is all still working? Well, that's because they're doing a cauldron strategy where they're encouraging the civilians to leave and the men to leave as long as they don't bring in any weapons.
Right.
And then they're going to encircle the city, and then whoever's left is not a non-combatant. They would be a combatant. So that's a very long strategy. But then watching the TV generals, and I just want to throw a brick through the TV nowadays. I can't even watch U.S. news. It's so rigged. So now this is coming into a play. Instead of saying, well, they actually do have a more delicate strategy than the United States, they're saying that, well, the Russia's just going to grind this out and just start indiscriminately shelling the cities, because they don't talk about how the Mariupol and Kherson area is a stronghold of the Nazis. I mean, the Nazis. I don't think we should say that word.
Yeah. Let's not say that word on here. It's kind of like using the small Middle Eastern country. It's just words you can't use on mainstream platforms.
The far right groups, Svoboda Group, C14, and the Azov battalion. So after that, they're going to close in up to the Dnieper. And I was listening to Coach Red Pill's been on the Duran, so I got to watch both at the same time because they did a couple of shows.
Hopefully we're going to be having them on very soon. If you guys haven't watched, we've had the Duran on once on these streams, so they've been here before. Hopefully we'll have them again. I just want to also just interrupt for a second. There's from Tally-san, and he says and this is going back to what you were talking about. He says the reverse Midas touch implies it's somehow unintentional, and this is the Western elite playbook. So thanks for that. I appreciate the support. But yeah, I completely agree with that. 100%.
Oh, it's that is such an astute comment. Because I had glossed over, because I'm explaining a lot of different things, and I can go, everybody knows I can go on for an hour about any topic. The billionaire class, the one percenters, for lack of a better term, they know exactly what's going on. But for the average NGO worker, they have no idea what's going on.
Yeah.
Like, okay, back in 2014.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but some of your stories about Kabul just before the fall of it, and some of the stories you were giving me about the supposed educated people working at the State Department were absolutely horrifying. They would be funny if it wasn't so horrifying. Some of these things. And there's another from Sparky. He's saying the educated, meaning educated people who are, or people that think they're educated, they lack regular people's healthy cynicism. And I would agree with that. But sorry, I just wanted to get that out.
Because I wanted to get into that subject because
sorry, before you continue, I don't mean there's a lot of people here saying that George needs his own YouTube channel. He has better takes than most people. So there's that. Just so there's a lot of people saying that about so
thanks for the encouragement.
They want you to get your own YouTube channel, by the way, is what it is.
We're working on it. Okay. I just got better internet with actual real fiber optic feeds, so my feed doesn't drop anymore. So that'll be a next step. And I got a new headset that stays connected.
We've lost George. It's become kind of a meme on these streams. Oh, we lost George. Oh, is George? Oh, can we hear George? It's kind of so it's all good. Yeah. And also, I should say, guys, I'm putting George's Telegram in the chat right now, but you can also find it in the description of what the hell is this chat? I've just lost my chat. Are you still there, guys? Can you hear me? George, are you there, dude?
Yeah, I'm here. I hear you just fine.
Okay.
I got fiber optic feed and a new headset. I'm good to go.
Okay, yeah, I don't know. So it looks like I've lost the ability to interact with the chat on my end. So apologize. Can we get a 1 for you can still hear us, chat, or a number 2? Because something just happened in the chat overlay here, which is quite weird. Okay, they can still hear us. So okay, I've lost the ability to work with the chat, which is kind of strange.
All right,
but whatever.
Well, also, where is Tiffany Dover? Because that's what Coach Redfield says. I mean, you have these, because before I talked about the DC bubble, you have people in these different agencies that just get in this bubble, and let me get to the NGOs and stuff like that, because what these billionaires are doing is they're paying these woke NGO people to go into these countries with all these woke issues. But meanwhile, and this is kind of funny if it weren't so tragic. Meanwhile, the big tech, big oil, big finance is moving in, and they're not stealing the oil, but they're distributing in the oil instead of somebody else. So they're redirecting the profits of said oil. So you have this huge money going on in the background, and you have these government employees just they don't realize that they're creating a diversion for the big boys to come in and make the huge profits. And that's where the disconnect is. I was talking back in 2014 when I went from Bagram to Kabul. I was talking to, and I tell this story to everybody because it's so indicative. I was talking to this one late 30-something female, and she was like, oh well, we closed down the consulate in Mazar-e Sharif, and we came down here. I'm like, well, since all the oil and minerals are mostly up north, and all the railroad and the highway infrastructure is all on the other side of the river, the Amudarya, in the different stands, the old Soviet railroad and highway infrastructure is what I'm talking about. I said, We should have closed down Kabul and moved everything up to Mazar-e-Sharif. And she's looking at me. I said, there's no way to get any minerals out of Kabul because you can't go through Pakistan because it's an unstable situation. The Pashtun Taliban, those are all Pashtun areas. And they want to get rid of the Durand line that separates Afghanistan and Pakistan. So they'll blow up anything that you build down there. So you can't move it south. You can only go north. But with the 2014, well, let me back up a second. What pissed off Putin and caused the Georgian invasion was that I keep on going back to the timeline. The timeline is very, very important. Was the 2007 Munich conference, G20 Munich conference, where the Western countries, well, NATO said that they were going to expand into Ukraine and Georgia, and Putin said, no, do not do that. You've expanded it, NATO, up to the Baltics to St. Petersburg, but he didn't, Putin didn't do anything then. In 2008, 6 months later at the Bucharest NATO conference, NATO said again that ignored what Putin said and said, we are going to move into Georgia and Ukraine. Again, that's right where the North and South Caucasus pipelines go through. And people need to look at a map. I didn't have time to post one up today, but if people just Google Caspian Sea oil and natural gas pipelines, you'll see a ton of them. You'll see a ton of them on the images, and just keep on looking at them because there's all kinds of games right now going on. But anyway, the reason why I tell the story about this person saying that they closed down the consulate in Mazar-e-Sharif and moved everything to Kabul was because they're so focused. I don't know what they're focused on. They're not focused on first principles economic and development strategies. They're not looking at a map to see which areas are unstable because, that's where, said enemy is. And because up north was where the Uzbeks and the Tajiks were. Well, when they moved all the free helicopter money down south, then the Uzbeks and Tajiks that moved the Pashtun Taliban out of Kabul and Kandahar also came down south. So then 2 decades later, when we go to withdraw, then the Pashtun move back up north and take the area vacated by the Uzbeks and the Tajiks, and then they trap them in Kabul. So now Kabul is set up for a genocide. While Afghanistan never did have a functioning, sustainable economy because they never went back to first principles of they should have stayed in Mazar-e, developed an economy. Instead, the United States did all this woke stuff. So it's and spent $2.5 trillion in doing it. And
they had absolutely nothing to show for it. Absolutely nothing to show for it. Yeah, I mean the absolute debacle that American adventurism was in the Middle East. I mean, it should give everyone pause to want to be getting into another fight, I guess.
And somebody put in the chat, NATO in Georgia. He didn't realize states could join NATO. Well, Fort Benning is in Georgia, the state.
The state of Georgia. With that said, George, with that said, we're going to wrap it up because we've been going for about now an hour and 40 minutes or so. And I want to keep it. Unfortunately, you weren't able to join at the beginning, but I think it's been a pretty good chat. I'd like to say thanks very much. Is there anything you'd like to shout out to our listeners before we go? Before we do that, I would say I'm going to put it in the chat right now. I've put it several times, but I'm going to put it one last time. Follow George on Telegram. The link is in the description of the video you're watching on whatever platform you are watching. But also, I've just put it into the chat. Also, please follow me on Telegram as well. I'm going to put that in the chat. You can find it in the description as well, but put it in the chat right now. It'd be very much appreciated. I'm most active on Telegram because it is a platform that has very, very light censorship. They do not censor in the kind of ways that you get from mainstream platforms. And I think that's why it's become such a popular platform in such a short amount of time. But sorry, I wanted to just give you the last word there, George. Anything you want to impart to our audience before we wrap it up for today?
Oh, no, we can go ahead and wrap it up. I've just done a ton of, I've emailed you some of the research I've done to give you a heads up.
Okay.
There's just so much to talk about because, since the 2008 conferences and then the 2014 Maidan revolutions have freaked out. They freaked out the Asian countries, Russia, Iran, China, and India, but the the Arab Spring revolutions freaked out the Arab League. So this movement, because you're talking about Saudi Arabia earlier,
right?
So this regime change and color revolutionary strategy using using the military and big tech, big finance, it really is backfiring on the United States and creating a very unstable world. And all the countries are trying to exit the petrodollar now.
Yes.
So they might. I mean, I'm listening to the news, and I think somebody said, "Well, I was listening." Anyway, it doesn't matter what I'm listening to. All the mainstream media say it. They wonder why China would rather take a temporary hit on their economy with U.S. sanctions. Well, I mean, China thinks that they can take a hit for 1 or 2 years, but they think that I'm guessing that they think that they can totally crash the U.S. petrodollar. And since we're 33 trillion allocated in debt, and another 4 or 5 times that in underfunded pension liabilities, I'm guessing that they're going to that they'd rather take a 2-year structural change in their economy and internalize the development within Asia and sit and watch the petrodollar absolutely totally collapse.
Yeah, and this is what I'd like to impart to our viewers. I think we're going to talk about this more, is the importance of the petrodollar and how it's going to absolutely upend the entire world as we know it.
Because then all that inflationary spending that we're doing will actually, what are we? They say it's 7.5%. We all know it's double that.
Yeah.
Okay, and then what happens if it doubles again?
Absolutely. All right. With that said, guys, thank you very much for watching. It's been very much appreciated. Thank you for everybody who contributed financially to the chat. Very much helps, as my channels are very much being algorithmically demoted. Very, very much. So thanks for that. Thanks for everyone being here. Thanks for everyone in the chat contributing their thoughts. It is very much appreciated. And we will see you. We're bringing back Michael probably in the next chat. We should have the Duran on quite soon, and I'm assuming that we're going to be probably having Coach Red Pill on again, as probably within this week. I understand that he's just had some problems, but hopefully everything's okay. He said everything was fine. It's just that he had to go and do this. So that being said, everybody, thank you very much for watching, and we will see you soon. Bye for now.